Taoiseach, the US-Israeli assault on Iran is an act of aggression that threatens to set the entire Middle East ablaze. A sovereign state has been bombed, its leader assassinated, 185 innocent schoolgirls killed. These are not defensive actions. They are the actions of powerful states acting in defiance of international law. Let me state very clearly, the Iranian government is brutal and repressive. It's crushed protesters, oppressed women and jailed dissidents. That merits the highest of condemnation. But the brutality of one government does not licence another to set aside international law and engage in military aggression. Israel, already pursuing a genocide in Gaza, has widened its murderous campaign. Israel has no interest in peace, in compromise or in negotiation. And the United States has backed and enabled this escalation. This represents military aggression over diplomacy. This confrontation has already spilled into Lebanon and across the Gulf. Taoiseach, the UN Charter is explicit. Force is prohibited, save in the case of imminent self-defence or UN security authorisation, and neither is demonstrated here. Preemptive is not a substitute for legality. And yet, your government's response has been limited to expressions of concern and calls for restraint. So can I ask you directly, Taoiseach, will you condemn the US-Israeli strikes without qualification? Will you state clearly that they are in breach of international law? Because Irish neutrality demands that the Taoiseach is unequivocal on both these questions.
Ireland is in favour of a multilateral rules-based international order and have consistently advocated for same. And we believe in immediate de-escalation of the conflict in the Middle East, and particularly in Iran. And we believe these issues ultimately, in terms of a sustainable resolution of this, has to be via the diplomatic channels. And diplomacy ultimately is the only route that can sustainably bring about a lasting peace. Iran has been a very malign influence in the world and in the Middle East, and in terms, as you yourself have acknowledged, in terms of its repression of women, of the LGBT community, the execution in their thousands of Iranians by the regime for advocating for freedom of speech and freedom of assembly and for seeking change through democratic channels. The international rules-based order, if we're honest about it, was absolutely powerless and paralysed in terms of intervening there to protect execution of thousands of people. And we do believe in a multilateral-based order, but we have to see reality too in terms of the full picture in this. And remember, Iran for years and decades has sponsored Hamas. They've sponsored terror all over the Middle East, sponsored Hezbollah, armed them, supported Assad, and were key in keeping Assad and the brutal regime of Assad in power for a long time, and sent drones to the Russian military to kill innocent Ukrainians. Now, these are realities that you've glossed over, and I know you don't support Ukraine, and you referenced Ukraine. It's the truth, because you opposed the European 90 billion loan to Ukraine. And if we were to follow your advice on that, it is tantamount to saying to Ukraine, please surrender now to the Russians, because there's no way on earth that Ukraine could sustain itself, either budgetarily or in terms of defending itself, if it was not to get that 90 billion from the European Union.
The Iranian regime is brutal. We've utterly condemned it. But so too is the Israeli and US attacks on Iran illegal. And we should be able to say that very clearly. Indeed, the Spanish Prime Minister Socialist Prime Minister in Spain, has been very clear in condemning the attacks, in refusing to allow Spanish bases to be used by the US. So why can't we have that clarity here? Instead, as I said, you engage in a sort of doublespeak, condemning or rather criticising the UN, yet failing to recognise that, in fact, there has been an effective use of multilateral institutions in containing and reducing and diminishing Iran's nuclear capabilities. Why can we not work with the multilateral institutions we have? Why can we not hear the Irish government condemning clearly the US-Israeli strikes as in breach of international law? There is, I think, Taoiseach, a clear indication that you're soft-pedalling a national response in fear of upsetting Washington ahead of Bacik's Day. I think that has to be the conclusion that we all must draw. And the Irish people are not fools. I think that's what we're seeing here.
Taoiseach, please.
I think St. Patrick's Day will come and go. It's the more enduring, sustainable relationship between the US and Ireland that's important. But park that for a moment. So Patrick's Day will come and go. There'll be many of those. But the relationship is much deeper and much more substantial than that. And let's be honest about that too. You referenced the UN Security Council. By virtue of the composition post-World War II, it is no longer fit for purpose. I'm not criticising every member of the UN. But the reality is with Russia, China, US, please, the alternative is a much broader UN Security Council without the veto of these three powers. That's the obvious way. Africa should be represented. South America should be represented. People who can make a contribution where vast populations of the world are not represented on the Security Council. And all we're getting is veto after veto after veto. We can't get peacekeeping missions approved by the UN Security Council. One of the most sustainable peacekeeping missions that we've been involved in is Lebanon. And at the behest of the US, the Security Council has put a deadline on that for next year.
Deputy
those are the
Holly
realities
Thank you, Taoiseach.
of the UN Security Council. That hasn't been fit for purpose for a long time.
The United States and Israel have labelled their strikes on Iran as preemptive. They've done that purely for propaganda purposes, to try to give their violent attacks a veneer of legality. But let's be clear. This military action is a clear breach of international law. It should be strongly condemned by you and the rest of your government. Instead, we get words of, quote, concern and dismay. From reading your statement, Taoiseach, you wouldn't even know that the US were involved. More than 700 people, including 168 schoolgirls, have already been slaughtered in Iran, and the death toll is rising across the region. This escalation in violence has caused huge distress and anxiety for thousands of Irish citizens now stranded in Gulf countries. And it has also exposed our 358 peacekeepers in Lebanon to significant danger. Their families need to be assured that they will be pulled out of the situation if it deteriorates further. Taoiseach, does the Irish government now believe that large countries can simply ignore international law and launch attacks on other countries whenever they feel like it? The fact is, the Trump administration changes their rationale for going to war day by day, and European leaders, including yourself, are just stepping back and allowing that to happen, refusing to outright condemn the US as they continue to dismantle international law. Taoiseach, I can't emphasise enough my condemnation of the Iranian regime and its treatment of women in particular. But where does this end? International law does not just apply to countries that we agree with. The structures are there to prevent all hell breaking loose on an international stage, and those structures are being completely dismantled. Trump has bombed 7 countries since taking office and has faced no consequences for his actions. Taoiseach, the strategy of appeasing the Trump administration has not worked. It is past time European leaders, including you, need to stand up for international law.
Taoiseach, to respond.
Taoiseach, will you condemn this attack? Will you rule out any use of Shannon Airport for the US military? And will you outline the steps you're taking to ensure repatriation of Irish citizens stranded in the Middle East?
Thank you.
First of all, I would condemn the killing of children anywhere, in any situation. Children and innocent civilians must always be prioritised, without question. One of the big challenges, and I do think it's the UN, and we are similar to where we were prior to the demise of the League of Nations. There is a very, very serious issue in the world. It is dangerous, without question. There is an absence of an international rules-based order right now. Of that, there's no question. And that is very dangerous for small nations like Ireland who depend on an international rules-based order for our security, because we're not a military nation. We don't have military power. We're fundamentally a peacekeeping nation. That is our orientation. That has been our contribution, as well as humanitarian aid to many troubled spots in the world, and as well as contributing Irish personnel to conflict resolution to all over the world. We've done it in Mozambique, Colombia, elsewhere. That is our contribution. And to try and characterise the Irish position as anything else is disingenuous. That is how we perform on the international level.
That was a very long-winded way of saying that no, you will not condemn the breach of international law, and I think that we can all agree that the UN is imperfect, but it is the best that we've got, and I think you should be doing a lot more to try and defend that. You can't just say that you support international law, you have to defend it when it matters. You have to call out the US when they trample all over it. First and foremost, the people of the Middle East will suffer as a result of this illegal war, but the effects will be global. Energy companies are already cynically capitalising on this crisis with blatant price gouging. We've had reports of the price of home heating oil skyrocketing, which would be devastating for people all over the country who are already struggling, not least the disabled people who are protesting at the weekend because they simply cannot afford to live in this country. So, Taoiseach, can you tell us what you're going to do about energy price gouging that is already underway, and what supports have been made available to people who simply cannot take any further rising costs? And will you at least consider the Social Democrats' proposal for a €400 energy credit to those who need it the most?
First of all, in terms of the energy situation, there is a degree of price gouging going on, it would appear, from anecdotal accounts. In our view, both the CRU and the Competition and Consumer Authority should very closely now monitor what's happening, and people who have complaints should immediately complain to the Competition and Consumer Authority and also to the CRU. The working family payment will start on Thursday, and an extra 50,000 families will benefit from the fuel allowance. Those on working family payments will benefit from the fuel allowance, and they'll get back pay to January. That will be a help to that cohort. We will keep an urgent review on the situation as it unfolds, because there is the potential of a crisis here, clearly, similar to what happened in terms of the invasion of Ukraine and the consequential energy crisis that occurred there. We will keep this under a continual review in terms of how this develops over the next number of days and weeks.
Deputy